All right, and we are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 50th episode of TechForge. I'm your host, Ned, and I'm joined by my ever faithful co host, Hunter.
Hey, how's it going?
Going pretty well here. Glad to have you with us again. And so, this week we've got some tech news we want to bring you. There's a lot of AMD news this week, so we're going to be spending a lot of our time on that, but there's also some important stories from Intel and NVIDIA plus some miscellaneous stuff that we found interesting. And as always, we'll have some hardware deals that you can use to help improve your own PC setup. So stay tuned for all of that. Hunter, got anything that's happened in the past week that was interesting for you?
My brother's trying to build a budget Photoshop and gaming computer as
Okay.
budget as he can. So he's got a Ryzen 2600 that was on sale. There's this 120 on sale recently in this Newegg Newegg's version of Prime Day. And he's got the Thermaltake Core V21 case that I had at first, but I didn't really have a purpose for it. It was a little bit too wide for my space in my room to put
Gotcha.
to put a computer in. Needed something a little bit more traditionally wide enough to where it's not cause a lot of space issue, I guess. And he wanted a gaming computer. He was a Mac person previously, and now he's coming over to the PC gaming side. And he also has a PlayStation, which is fun.
One more joins the well, we can't use that term because YouTube gets mad at us if you do, so
And the one good thing about that is I'm trying to shrink down my space of hardware that's not being used right now, so I'm going to give as much as I can to him. Uh, I figure since he needs a lot of Photoshop space and photo edited space, I have a spare 1.5 terabyte WD Black drive that I cleared off. I had, I really wish that 2.5-inch drives. It's so crazy that 2.5-inch drives are this small and 3.5-inch drives are this huge. I
yeah,
really
it's
wish that there was higher than 2 terabytes for a 2.5-inch drive. Even this Firecuda is the spinning disk part is 5400 RPM, but it has 8 gigs of cache, of SSD cache, so it makes it to faster than a traditional 5400 RPM drive, but still don't quite know. And I've seen the benchmarks. I still don't quite know how fast it is, but I think I might give that to him, so he'll have a games drive. He bought a Intel 660p 512 gig NVMe for OS and probably Photoshop and some other programs.
yeah, that's a
And
solid drive.
yeah, it is. The 1 terabyte is $95 now on sale, possibly, but $95, that's pretty good.
Yeah, we featured it at that price in the past a couple of times before, but the fact that it's getting down to that price consistently now just illustrates how inexpensive NAND flash is starting to get.
Oh yeah. So there's a few other parts that I'm gonna give him, and it'll be for his birthday and Christmas presents because I spent a little bit of money on this stuff. Um, so
Understandable.
that'll be once I get all that build. Yeah. Once I get all that build done, and it'll give me a chance to teach him how to build a computer. So that'll be cool. Get to take pictures of all the stuff.
Sounds like a plan.
Yep.
Well,
So
let's
this
jump
is
straight into the tech news. And this first one, it's a story. It's from Tom's Hardware. We won't show it on screen, but it's one of those things where you kind of wonder, why would someone do that? But it's kind of fascinating that it could be done. And it's that someone has managed to get Windows XP running on blockchain. That's right. They have built a virtualized Windows XP environment that runs off a Bitcoin style blockchain.
I mean,
So apparently, a developer who goes by the name of Shizuku managed to take parts of Windows XP and run them on the Bitcoin SV blockchain. And so apparently this version of Windows XP lets people play Minesweeper, lets you listen to music via Winamp, and you can even create stuff in Paint.
hmm.
You can look at the File Explorer and you can open up Internet Explorer, but Internet Explorer, if you try to navigate to other pages, generally crashes, which is nothing new for Internet Explorer on Windows XP. But that said, in some ways, this is both something new and interesting, and it's also something we've seen several times before. I mean, it's basically Windows XP emulated over the web. But this time, it's running on a blockchain backend, but it's an interesting proof of concept at the very least. I mean, it shows that this isn't just for hyperinflationary cryptocurrencies, that this blockchain technology can be utilized for other things as well. Do I see a future where people are running VMs on blockchain? Probably not in the near term, but it's at the very least an interesting application of a technology that some people consider to be rather one-dimensional. So Windows XP on blockchain. Get back to me when you can run Windows 7. I kid.
That would be fun. This project seems like
Uh,
what if I can? All the what
yeah,
if I
it's
can
very much
is always interesting.
it's very much I'm doing this because I can, not necessarily because it's the best idea.
Yeah.
All right. So, just a silly little thing to open things up with. If you want to run Windows on blockchain, then by all means, you are more than welcome to try.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this next one, Hunter, you originally shared this one in the chat that we use to figure out the show notes every week.
Yeah.
It's from Phoronix, and it's the Corsair Force MP600 PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD. And apparently they ran benchmarks on it on Linux. Of course, Linux is a fundamentally different operating system from Windows, which most people game on. But Linux does have the advantage that it is a lighter weight operating system by and large than Windows, and it typically has earlier support for new technologies. And because it is lighter weight than Windows, you typically see some performance improvements. That said, that's not always the case. But these early numbers from Phoronix on the Corsair Force MP600 at least gives us an idea of what kind of speeds we can expect from PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD. So I will go ahead and share this since we've got some photos. So we've got a picture here of the MP600. as well as what it looks like when you remove the sticker. It is running on a Phison controller, as you can see there. Let's see if we can get up close. Yeah, apparently is a Phison PS5016-E16-32. And you can see they've got it running here on this X570 motherboard. It looks like it's an ASUS ROG model. Yep, ASUS ROG Crosshair 8 Hero on BIOS 0702. And so they have everything here listed, the different drives they tested, how they tested, what have you. And so let's take a look at some of the benchmarks. So a lot of these tests they're going to be running are ones originally designed for server workloads. So the first one we have SQLite or SQLite. It's a light version of SQL that's sometimes used for embedded databases. You can see that among the drives listed here, the MP600 2 terabyte has the lowest timed iteration or timed insertions at 15.20 seconds. This is roughly 8 seconds faster than the 860 EVO and even the 970 EVO or the 970 Pro. And again, these are all NVMe drives, and they compare it to a traditional hard drive for reference. Yes, that's how much of a difference there is between a regular hard drive and an SSD. Flexible I/O. In this case, higher throughput is better. We see the MP600 best pretty much everything else out on the field. But remember, these other drives, including the Intel Optane 900P, are limited by the PCIe 3.0 interface. So that's why you see the MP600 have such a lead. So we have sequential read, sequential write, over 4,000 megabytes per second, nearly 4250. That's 4.25 gigabytes per second. And 4.069 gigabytes per second. Now, here we have some of the first tests where the MP600 doesn't wind up on top. FS-Mark measures files per second. The MP600 comes in second at 594, and that is versus the Intel Optane 900P at 792 files per second. We can see it does edge it out in the 5,000 files test versus the 1,000 files test. They did timed GCC compilation. GCC is the General C compiler that's used in a lot of Linux distributions. We can see that the MP600 compiles in 658 seconds, which is about 20 seconds faster than the hard drive. So as we can see, the actual speed of the SSD doesn't have a huge effect on the compile time. MariaDB is another open source SQL option that you can use, MySQL or MariaDB. We can see 519 queries per second, which is significantly more than even the Intel 900P. We have PostgreSQL. MP600 comes in second to the Optane 900P, which of course has Optane memory. And we can see when they do the geometric mean of all results, the MP600 comes out on top. And comes out about 17% faster overall versus the Intel Optane 900P. And remember, the 900P has the advantage of Intel's Optane memory, which has significantly lower latency than NAND flash. But it does still only have a PCIe 3.0 interface and controller. And so the conclusion they come to is that it shows a lot of potential for PCI Express 4.0, and they're looking forward to seeing more like it. So all of that to say that the future is looking quite bright for PCIe 4.0.
Which is good for content creators.
Really, anyone who has any I/O or thread or bandwidth heavy application, content creators, people running heavy workloads in a server-like environment or an enterprise environment. So while it's true that PCIe 4.0 is generally overkill for, say, graphics cards in the present time, for other applications like these SSDs, it represents an almost doubling of performance, as we saw in some of those tests. All right. Speaking of memory, there was an announcement today, as we're recording this, July the 18th, that Toshiba is rebranding their memory operation as, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Kioxia, Kiaoxia, which is apparently a unique brand name that's from a combination of the Japanese words for memory and the Greek word for value. Okay, I'll read from the press release here. Okay, they do have how to pronounce it here. It's Kioxia. Kioxia. All right, so here's reading straight from the press release. Toshiba Memory America Incorporated announced today that it will officially change its name to Kioxia America Incorporated on October 1st, 2019. The name Kioxia will be adopted for the names of all Toshiba memory companies, largely effective on the same date. Kioxia is a combination of the Japanese word kyoku, meaning memory, and the Greek word axia, meaning value. Merging memory with value, Kioxia represents the company's mission to uplift the world with memory, which forms the foundation of the company's vision. And they have listed Kioxia's mission, uplifting the world with memory. By evolving memory, we create uplifting experiences and change the world. And their vision statement is that with progressive memory technology at the core, we offer products, services, and systems that create choice and define the future. All of which is significant corporate speak for, please buy our products, we want to make money. So, out with Toshiba memory and in with Kioxia.
Well, it's quicker to say, sort of.
That's for sure. And, you know, they haven't really had a brand to work with for a while. I mean, Toshiba kind of has a reputation, or doesn't really have a reputation in the computer hardware space. I mean, they've manufactured computer commodity hardware for a while. They make hard drives that are pretty good, but nothing outstanding. They make SSDs. They bought OCZ back a while back, and for a while they were using the OCZ branding with the Toshiba name, but they kind of dropped that, and so now we see why. If they're going to go with Kioxia as their marketing name in the United States, then, you know, I'm excited to see what Kioxia puts out.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, that concludes our general tech session of the program. And so I said when we started there was going to be a number of AMD stories this week. And that's because there's been a little bit of drama around the AMD Ryzen 3000 launch, as well as some announcements of some add-in board partner models of the Radeon RX 5700 XT. And
And a nice
also, go ahead.
and a nice little fight between one add-in board partner for motherboards and AMD for a feature
Yes.
on the new motherboards.
Right. And so let's talk about Ryzen 3000. Of course, Ryzen 3000 is on the AM4 socket, and AMD promised to support the AM4 socket all the way through 2020, including on their. Basically, they said that most motherboards from the 300 and 400 series would be able to socket in Ryzen 3000 chips. And so, just like they did with the 400 series, AMD is providing a free temporary UEFI upgrade kit for Ryzen 3000 motherboard updates. So, for example, I have a motherboard. It is a solid motherboard. It is a Gigabyte GA X370 Gaming 5. Very solid, stable X370 motherboard. But if I wanted to buy a Ryzen 7 3700X and drop it in there, presently, I wouldn't be able to do that because the BIOS I'm running is, while it's not old, it is prior to the Ryzen 3000 release. It's, I think, came out in March, if I remember correctly, the BIOS I'm running. But there is a renewed BIOS out, and if I didn't already have a Ryzen first generation chip, I could send in to AMD, and they would send you one of their Athlon APUs to put into socket AM4 and allow you to do the update. The story here comes from Extreme Tech. It says, if you need a CPU to perform a UEFI update, AMD will ship you one, provided you have made a valid purchase of a Ryzen 3rd Gen CPU and can't boot the motherboard due to a UEFI update issue. Send AMD a photo of your CPU with serial numbers visible and a copy or summary of communication with your motherboard manufacturer to indicate why support from the OEM won't solve the problem. AMD's help page goes through several options that may help users fix the problem without needing a new CPU, but AMD will ship users an Athlon 200GE with prepaid return shipping to perform the updates. The CPU must be returned within 10 days, but users are free to keep the included thermal solution if they so desire. And so they have a link there to where you can go to AMD's help page and apply for one of those kits where you need it. Of course, we include all the links from our show down below in the description, so make sure to check it out down there. They did this with the 400 series boards as well, and I'm glad to see that they are choosing to do it. Not every motherboard is going to be able to update unless you have a first or second gen Ryzen chip. I know. I recently acquired a BioStar motherboard. It's a X370 Mini ITX motherboard. Unlike my Gigabyte board, it does not have BIOS flashback. So you have to have a Ryzen first or second generation chip in order to update the UEFI BIOS. And so I'm glad that they are doing this.
Yeah, me too. It makes sense to where people who are just starting out by building a Ryzen 3000 series build don't have to buy their own or borrow friends, I guess. My brother almost did that, but he decided to get the 2600 because it was cheaper.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Although
So,
3600 was really tempting.
yeah, it certainly is. I mean, I saw some of the numbers for the 3600 and the 3600X, and they're almost as fast as my 1800X from 2 years ago. So,
I mean, it beating or matching the i7 8700K is really interesting.
yeah, because that CPU only came out a little over a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and that's also a 6-core 12-thread.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we go from good guy AMD to not so good guy AMD.
Yeah, here's where the fun starts.
So we have an article from a non-tech. I'm not going to show it on the screen because it basically just sets the stage for the next article that I'm going to show. And that's that AMD confirmed back at the beginning of June that PCIe 4.0 is not going to be supported by them or recommended by them on older motherboards, in particular X470, X370, B450, B350, and A320. Now, on A320, it's for pretty obvious reasons because that CPU or that chipset just barely supported PCIe 3.0. But the others is where it's a little less clear.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll let you go on more
So,
before I give my thoughts.
yeah, a non-tech points out that from a physical connector perspective, there's literally no difference between PCIe 3.0 and PCIe 4.0. The difference is in the way the signaling works. And that can technically be fixed with an update to the chipset, which means technically PCIe 4.0 could work on X370 and X470 motherboards if they could be flashed to do so. But Robert Halleck, who is one of the Ryzen product managers for AMD, posted, quote, pre-X570 boards will not support PCIe Gen 4. There's no guarantee that older motherboards can reliably run the more stringent signaling requirements of Gen 4, and we simply cannot have a mix of yes, no, maybe in the market for all the older motherboards. The potential for confusion is simply too high. When final BIOSes are released for 3rd Gen Ryzen, AGESA 1000 Plus, Gen 4 will not be an option anymore. We wish we could have enabled this backwards, but the risk is simply too great. Now, obviously, this means that if you want access to PCIe 4.0, for example, to use one of those MP600 SSDs we talked about earlier in the show, you almost have to buy an X570 board. Or do you? Because ASUS ASUS rebelled. And ASUS believes that older socket AM4 motherboards can handle PCIe Express Gen 4.0 with some tweaks. And so, on their AMD 400 series chipset motherboards, they've started exposing the PCIe 4.0 toggle in their BIOS. And so, I do want to show this article from Tech Power Up because they have some interesting pictures that illustrate how they do this. So let's take a look The original story came from a Chinese site called My Drivers, where they gave this list of motherboards from ASUS that you'd be able to enable PCIe Gen 4 through a toggle in the BIOS. And you'll notice there's some interesting motherboards on there. So, as it turns out, they're high-end motherboards. The ROG Crosshair 7, the Crosshair Hero, or the Crosshair 7 Hero Wi-Fi, and the X470i Gaming are not going to be able to support PCIe 4.0 times 16. But their lower end boards, the ROG Strix X470F, X470 Pro, and TUF X470 Plus Gaming will support Gen 4 at either by 8 or by 16 speeds, which is curious. Likewise, for the B450 boards, the 3 boards at the top of the range won't support PCIe Gen 4, but the lower end boards will. Now, some people on Reddit and the like have pointed out that the likely reason this is because this means that ASUS can continue to sell their X570 boards and encourage people on X470 to upgrade to X570, while giving people who are at the more budget end of the spectrum the ability to enable PCIe Gen 4, with the caveat that it may not work as intended. This is a further list of the BIOSes that you need to download for each board to make sure that you enable AMD Ryzen 3000 and likewise potentially PCIe 4.0. But here I want to show that, let's see, where is it? This is the ASUS BIOS for the TUF B450M Pro Gaming, and I thought they showed the toggle here. I may have been mistaken. But they show that on this TUF B450M motherboard they were doing their testing on, they were getting sequential write speeds of 5,013 and sequential writes of 4,284, which are decidedly PCIe Gen 4 speeds. And so, basically, if you make sure that your motherboard is one of these from ASUS that's enabled with Gen 4, and that you make sure to use the M.2 slot or the PCIe times 16 slot that's directly wired to the CPU, then you should be able to utilize Gen 4 devices on these older motherboards. However, My Drivers also reports that AMD is not terribly happy with ASUS marketing this as a feature and is looking to block it in updates to the AGESA microcode in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, ASUS has tried to rebel against AMD and provide some additional value for their previous customers, but AMD is trying their best to say no.
Yeah.
So basically, go ahead.
And I saw from another video that it was stability issues on the older boards that the AMD cited as the reason for not wanting to support it. Which, yeah, I guess that makes sense. still kind of seems like we want to sell our X570 line, so we're going to say no.
Yeah, it does kind of seem that way.
Because there wouldn't really be much. I mean, there would be PCI. I mean, there would be the yeah. There wouldn't be much reason to upgrade to a newer board that costs significantly more, because that's X570 line is a high-end line currently, and there's previously no plans for a B550 motherboard series.
At least until early next year.
Yeah.
So, if you do manage to download one of these ASUS BIOS for your motherboard, where you do have PCIe Gen 4 enabled, you might not want to update your microcode, or you might not want to update your AGESA or your BIOS once you have that enabled.
Yeah. And also, if you do, please let us know how it works out. I'm definitely
Yeah.
interested in knowing about that. Let us know
Yeah.
in the comments if you do that.
Yeah, what do you think about AMD trying to lock out PCIe Gen 4 from older motherboards like B350, B450, X370, X470? Yeah. Definitely drop us down a comment below.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of new stuff, ASRock has gotten out in front of the rest of the field of AMD Radeon AIB board partners and has announced the first custom Radeon RX 5700 Challenger series graphics cards for the RX 5700 and 5700 XT. And I had to say, these look pretty good. So I'm going to show these photos here. Okay, here we are. So you can see this photo, which is kind of their glamour shot. It does have a dual fan cooler. It has kind of this angular design with these yellow inlays on a black and silver. So obviously it's not going to work with every color scheme, but I do think it's a nice design. You know, and they're calling it the Challenger line with the tagline "Challenge the limits."
Mm-hmm.
So if we scroll down here a bit, we got a few more pictures. There's the 5700 XT along with its box. There's the 5700 with its box. Here's a couple more glamour shots. It does come with a backplate, and I gotta say, that is a nice looking backplate.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It's definitely a card that, if you care about aesthetics in your system, you kind of have to build around. But if you're just looking for performance,
Well, I could see gray fans and yellow LEDs matching with it.
yeah, that would work.
Noctua makes gray fans their redux because everybody didn't like their standard colors.
Yeah, that color brown, those colors tan and brown, they do get old after a while.
Kind of an eyesore if you're having a window in your case.
So ASRock is factory overclocking these cards in the Challenger series. They mention here on WCCF Tech, the 5700 XT Challenger will be clocked at 1650 base, 1795 game, and 1905 megahertz boost. Now that is a pretty significant jump for both the base and the game clocks. About 40 megahertz, 40 to 50 megahertz, which is not a huge amount, but it is technically factory overclocked. Likewise, the 5700 is also factory overclocked. They're saying it's going to come at 1515 base, 1675 game, and 1725 boost, which again is about a 50 megahertz improvement on each of those, except for the boost clock, which still tops out at 1725. So ASRock getting the first RX 5700 add-in board partner cards out there. Honestly, I do hope they do well.
Yeah. That'll be interesting to see the benchmarks on it.
Yeah, I eagerly await. Just as we were getting ready to begin recording, I noticed there was another story that had popped up that ASUS was, because ASRock had already kind of spilt the beans about their cards, ASUS decided to get it out there that they have custom AIB cards for the, for the new Navi GPUs coming too.
Oh.
And so, unfortunately, I didn't have time to add it to the list of news stories, but it should be pretty easy to find.
Yep.
Speaking of easy to find, well, the Radeon Technologies Group's leak problem continues with a possible Navi 14 GPU test submission hitting the CompuBench database. This is another leak. It comes from Komachi and Saka over on Twitter. Of course, the actual result from CompuBench has been pulled down, but we still have the photo of the result, which is filed under the ID AMD 7340:C1. Now, the 7340:C1 is important because that is a code name we have seen for Navi 14 in the past. And so a lot of people seem to think that this will probably be the RX 5600 or 5600 XT. But this is the first time we have seen Navi 14 as more than just a notation and a graphics driver. It's the first time we've seen it out in the wild. What we do know is that it's supposed to be 24 compute units and feature at least 4 gigabytes of VRAM. But that's kind of all we know so far. And so the fact that it is a 4 gig VRAM buffer indicates that this is going to be kind of an entry-level card. And so at some point, maybe this is going to be the 5600, maybe this is going to be the 5500, or however they decide to name it. Regardless, this is probably going to be the replacement for the RX 560-ish series. Although...
Yeah, I've seen somewhere that that there's a 5600. I think one of the partners have copyrighted or something, 5600 and 5800 XT and 5800. So that'll be fun to see those coming out soon or at some point.
There is some speculation that it could perform roughly on par with the RX 580 or 590. And if that is the case, that means it would redefine what entry-level performance looks like. Because remember, up to this point, the RX 580 was mid-range.
Yeah.
So, I never did show the benchmark. I should probably show that if we're going to talk about it. Okay, so here is the compute performance of AMD 7340:C1. Notice it has a 64-bit address bits. It has one CL device, one compiler, and it has a whole bunch of CL device extensions down here. They give us some idea of what it's capable of. So, could be in the not too distant future, we're talking about Navi 14 or the RX 5600 XT, which has me a bit excited. But that's not the only GPU that is kind of leaked out this week. And this is another one from the Phoronix testing suite for Linux. This was written by Michael Larrable. So, the AMD Arcturus codename appeared roughly last year, around September, in some various discussions and in some drivers for a successor to Navi, which is what is the basis for the current RX 5700 and 5700 XT. Well, a Linux kernel driver patch has been posted that features Radeon Arcturus as a driver enablement codename. However, based on the information in the driver, they were able to determine that Arcturus isn't based on Navi, but is rather a new spin on Vega, based on Vega 20. Remember, Vega 20 was what was used to make the Radeon 7. So people have wondered, why did the Radeon 7 go end of life so quickly? And the answer is likely because Arcturus is supposed to be right around the corner. And so Phoronix is saying that it's likely to be a soon-to-be-announced workstation card that they expect to be announced at the SIGGRAPH conference. They've already spotted a GFX 908 target added to the AMD GPU code. And apparently it's supposed to have ECC memory and other attributes that point to it being a workstation card. And so, like they say, Arcturus appears to be a forthcoming Vega workstation Radeon Instinct type offering that could be announced at SIGGRAPH based on the timing. Apparently, Arcturus has no 3D engine, so this is supposed to be likely a workstation accelerator. So, keep your eye out for any new Radeon workstation cards in the near future, because that's likely what Arcturus is going to be. All right, let's keep the train rolling. All right. So these next two stories kind of go with each other, but we've gotten through most of the AMD news. Intel, of late, hasn't really had a whole lot new to announce. They did announce, the 9900 KFS earlier, or the 9900KS and the KFS, which are supposed to have guaranteed 5 gigahertz out of the box, but they don't really have anything new to show. And this article from TechRadar, combined with the article from TechSpot, kind of tells us why. They say Intel admits it won't catch up with AMD's 7nm chips until 2021.
Thanks.
So yes, that means that Intel's 10nm, or whatever they're planning to compete with 7nm, isn't going to be ready before then. Of course, it says here Intel has explained how it struggled to bring 10nm processors to market, while also admitting it won't see its own 7nm chips until 2021. So these were from comments from Intel CEO, newly installed not too long ago, Bob Swan, who was at Fortune's Brainstorm Tech Conference in Aspen, Colorado. So what Swan said is that Intel's goal was to have 2.7 times the transistor density in its 10nm chips compared to current 14nm chips, and that, quote, this was too ambitious. At a time when it gets harder and harder, we set a more aggressive goal. From that, it just took us longer. And so that's why Intel has iterated on 14nm for almost 6 generations now, with the 6th, 7th, and 8th gen CPUs, the 9th gen CPUs, and soon to be the 10 series CPUs. Good grief. You can tell I am getting sleepy. And so, Intel's slow move to 14nm could mean that their own 7nm isn't going to be ready till 2021. Of course, many people have gotten to the point that where they say that Moore's Law is dead. Now, Moore's Law, which is named after former Intel co-founder and CEO Gordon Moore, states that transistor density in computer chips doubles at a cycle of roughly every 2 years. But we've seen that significantly fall by the wayside in the last few generations of the CPU wars because, well, Intel hasn't been able to get off 14nm. But this is the first time we're seeing Intel admit that it was too ambitious and too complicated a process that they tried to push themselves to do. Swan continues, the short story is we learned from it. We'll get our 10nm node out this year, and our 7nm node will be out in 2 years, and it'll be a 2-time scaling, so back to the historical Moore's Law curve. So we should finally see 10nm this year, with 7nm out in 2021. And so, Hunter, you kind of originally showed me this rebuttal over on TechSpot, or it's kind of by the Intel CEO. It says a lot of the same things, but there was something specific you wanted to point out about this one.
It just seems like I have to see if I can remember it. I think it just really says it in the article. It's just why they're stuck on. It seemed like it was a response to why they were stuck on 10nm and couldn't match AMD 7nm yet. Uh, I wonder what the difference between the two is, though. If well, I mean, the title does say it. They're prioritizing performance instead of probably trying to compete with core counts and thread counts. From what I read from the title, they're trying to do it differently from AMD.
Okay.
So I think it's,
So, yeah, we prioritized performance at a time when predictability was really important.
mhm.
And so, of course, we talked about this earlier in the year, but Bob Swan originally came in to Intel because the present CEO at that time, Brian Krzanich, exited because he had a forbidden relationship with another Intel employee. And so the interesting thing is Bob Swan is the first CEO who has not been a quote company lifer. He's one of the first CEOs to come in who has not worked at Intel the entirety of their career. So Intel is finally admitting it that they won't have their own 7 nanometer ready for at least 2 more years. What do you think is going to be the result of that?
AMD is going to have reign of, just like Intel had in the previous years. AMD is going to have the reign of the market for 2 years, and it's going to be an interesting battle between who's going to pick, especially for the business market. If AMD floods the business market with their chips, even Ryzen 3, it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really good. They're going to be on top.
So, with that, we'll leave it to you, audience. What do you think is going to be the import of Intel admitting finally that their 7 nanometer is at least 2 years away? Do you think 10 nanometers is going to be enough to hold off against Ryzen at 7 nanometers? Let us know in the comments down below.
Yeah.
All right, and we do have one piece of NVIDIA news this week. We talked quite a bit last week about the RTX 2060 and 2070 Super cards. And so there's been a lot of talk. There is going to be an RTX 2080 Super coming out later in the fall. But according to Tweaktown, and this was written by Anthony Gareffa, there will not be a GeForce RTX 2080 Ti Super. And so during the Super Reveal event, this is Anthony writing here, Senior Vice President and NVIDIA's PC business, Jeff Fisher, took to the stage, and during his presentation, he asked if any of the press had questions. After being introduced to the RTX 2060, 2070, and 2080 Super cards, I wanted to know if we'd see a super successor to the 2080 Ti. I asked, will there be a GeForce RTX 2080 Ti Super? To which Fisher replied, there would not be an RTX 2080 Ti Super. So, it looks like mostly the super cards are designed to shake up the mid to high end, but not the super high end. And so we will see new RTX 2060, 2070, and 2080 super cards, but no 2080 Ti Super. So if you had your eyes set on getting yourself one of those $1,200 2080 Ti's Supers, well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but it's just not going to happen. But hey, you might be able to convince NVIDIA to slap a new branding on a different card and try to market it as a 2080 Ti. I mean, that's basically what they did with the super cards, right?
Just bumped them up and recalled them, renamed them. Like we were saying previously, like rebranding up instead of rebranding.
Yep. That's pretty
Taking
much
them back
exactly
out
what it
word.
is.
Yep.
All right. Well, we got two last things to share with you all this evening, or, well, whenever you happen to be watching this. And that is our hardware deals for the week. Now, this past week was Prime Day here in the US on July the 15th and 16th. It's the 18th as we're recording this. And so there's still a few of those deals out there from the various sales from Newegg, Amazon, and what have you. And we found two of them here that are pretty excellent. First, we have the Rosewell Micro ATX Mini Tower Desktop Gaming PC Computer Case with USB 3.0, what it's known otherwise as the FBM-X2. Now, this is a very small, unassuming micro ATX case. There's nothing super fancy about it. It's got that faux brushed aluminum texture to its plastic. Side is boring. Back of the motherboard tray. If we take a look inside, we can see it's designed to accept a micro ATX motherboard, and it does give you routing holes for all your power supply stuff, which it does have a bottom mount power supply. And this gives us a look at the I/O ports. You can see it does have a single USB 3.0 port at the front and two traditional USB 2.0 headers here. You can see how the sides come off. Again, this is, in most regards, a very basic micro ATX case. But where the interest comes in is in the price. It's $30.
Yeah.
If
that is actually a nice. That is actually, sorry to cut you off. That is actually a nice step up from the previous XPM 01 and the other ones of the series. It's actually a lot nicer and more modern with the layout inside, and it has better routing. Too bad they don't have a window. That would be really cool if they had a window. But it could be good for very definitely budget. And it says that you can put two 120 millimeter fans on top or one 240 radiator. It's definitely a step up from the other XBM cases because they didn't have that. They didn't have radiator support previously. The one that I was looking at that was $30 that looked like a some store-bought case with a two-tone a gray strip going across some black black case. It was a little bit different. It was darker black than that full case. It had a 120 millimeter in the front, and then the sort of step up from that had a window, but it had like a hard drive wall here, so it's in the window space, which is kind of dumb. And that also didn't have radiator support. So this one is definitely a step up at the same price as the other ones with
yeah,
USB 3. The other ones didn't have.
it's a solid case for its price point. Yes, you can spend a bit more and you can get significantly more features. But if you're just looking, if you don't care about RGB or, form over function, if you just need a cheap, compact, functional mini tower case, here you go. You could take something like this. Go ahead.
Like building your son's first computer, or a sibling who doesn't care about or doesn't know about or care about RGB, and window in the side panel, or somebody who wants quiet silence over looks.
Yeah,
Like
I can see this being
Brian
absolutely
uses.
perfect for a basic budget build.
Yeah.
Put in a a $75 B450 motherboard with a Ryzen 5 2400 or 3400G, power supply, a solid state drive, and a hard drive, and voila.
Hmm.
So, if you need a micro ATX case, you could do far, far worse than this.
Yeah.
That brings us to our final hardware deal for the evening. And yes, we have featured RX 570s a lot on this show. And that's because they are still the deal when it comes to getting value for your money. And this is a Sapphire Pulse model. Sapphire, generally very solid and reliable company. The Pulse line is generally considered kind of the budget line, but you'll notice it comes with a very similar cooler to the Nitro series. So this is the RX 570. It is a 4 gigabyte card rather than an 8 gigabyte one. But a couple of things to note. It does have a backplate at $120. So, and I say at $120, and you're probably saying, but Nathan, that price says $134.99. Well, yes, but notice right here. You get an additional $15 off with promo code EMCTCUD45, bringing that cost down to $119.99. Now, admittedly, this isn't quite the blowout deal it has been in the past, because rather than getting 2 games with it like you did previously, you now get Xbox Game Pass for PC, which is still a $30 value, and still makes this well worth it as a brand new RX 570 card if you're wanting to play at 1080p medium settings. Honestly, unless you're in the very newest titles, you could probably play at 1080p high.
Hmm.
So after the promo codes and the $30 gift of the Xbox Game Pass, you're essentially getting this Radeon RX 5700 for about $90.
Hmm.
And that's a solid price for 1080p performance that'll work in almost any system as long as you have at least, I believe, a 6-pin plug. Let's see. Yeah, at least a 6-pin. And so, yeah, if you're looking for a solid entry-level GPU to get you started, you can't go wrong with the RX 570. All right, and with that, I'm afraid it's time for our show to come to a close. Hunter, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Anything we missed?
No, not at this point.
All right, well, of course, we will have links to all the articles that we've featured in this program down below in the comments. Look for the one-tab link to all articles in the description. And while you're down there, if you wouldn't mind giving us a like if you enjoyed everything you've seen here, And if you want to see more of our TechForge podcasts, of course, give that notification bell a ring, because that way you can make sure to always see when we post new videos.
Yep.
If you liked something we said, give us a comment down below. If you didn't like something we said, let us know that too. We always appreciate your feedback. In the meantime, I've been Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you. And forge on.
Yep. Forge on.